Our scripture this morning is from Psalm 139, verses 9 and 10. Psalm 139, verses 9 and 10. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. Our message today is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to start out by reading an article that appeared in the July issue of Sport Aviation, which is the Experimental Aircraft Association's magazine. It's entitled The Old Man and the Corsair. And if I have to stop and wipe my eyes, you'll know that it's difficult to read. The Old Man and the Corsair, a quiet moment with a hero. The old man was alone in his room when I walked in. He was slumped. Oh, by the way, the author of this was Loren Payne Jr. He writes for EAA. The old man was alone in his room when I walked in. He was slumped slightly in his wheelchair with his back to me. It was a nursing home. Nice, clean, with a caring staff, but a nursing home nonetheless. I froze for a moment, taking it all in. His name was John, and he loved visitors. What else was there to look forward to these days? But I was somehow hesitant to disturb whatever thoughts he was having at the moment. I stood there glancing at the pictures on the wall. World War II photos, young GIs and their Corsairs, F-4Us, big airplane, long snout, gull wing, one seat. The airplane seemed slightly banged up. Steeds of purpose, not show. One photo, an 8x10, faded black and white, showed a young man in a Corsair cockpit, straight teeth and a crooked smile. He was wearing a cloth helmet with earphones and looking directly at the camera. Proud, brave, all-American boy. That same man was sitting in front of me now, some 70 years later. I shifted my weight slightly as I turned to get a better look at another picture. The rubber soles on my sneakers made a slight squeak on the linoleum floor, and the old man stirred. I went to him. He looked up at me with old eyes. We'd never met. I didn't want him wondering who I was or if he should know me, so I just said, "Hi, I'm Lauren, and I like airplanes." I didn't tell him that I write or that I fly. This meeting wasn't about me, it was about him. Airplane was the only word he needed to hear. We were now linked. We were friends. He couldn't remember what happened yesterday, but he remembered 70 years ago like it was yesterday. And he was proud of his yesterdays, as he should be. He served his country, and he served it well. He served all of us. And that's why I was in the room with him, to talk with him about those days and to honor him. I looked at his left hand, slightly crippled, hanging limply over the edge of his wheelchair armrest. That same left hand, many years ago, was firmly set on a throttle controlling 2,000 horsepower in the form of a huge twin-row radial engine, making noise, a loud, deep, wonderful rumble of a noise. But it was quiet now as our eyes met. He held out his right hand, forever the gentleman, and we shook hands. His hand was infirm, but his grip was strong. That same hand held the Corsair's control stick, climbing, turning, diving, pulling, rolling, and shooting. A hand in total command of the big Vought thoroughbred. Did you fly the Corsair? I knew the answer, but I wanted him to be able to tell me. Yup. His eyes narrowed just a bit as he spoke and nodded. Was it a good airplane? Yeah, it was. It really was. Strong and faithful. Nothing about top speed, wing loading, ailerons, wingspan, or horsepower. Just strong and faithful. When you are a young man in combat, strong and faithful is all that matters. And it was the main thing you remembered many years later about your airplane. It faithfully brought you home. I cut to the chase with a risky question. Ever get scared? A slight smile. All the time. I didn't want to say anything, I just wanted to listen. bunch of us, all in it together. Scared or not, you just went. No way you'd ever let your buddies down. We had a job to do. He looked in the direction of the pictures on the wall as he spoke. Waving slightly toward them, he said, "Look at those kids. Bunch of young'uns, huh? Those kids would work on those engines until their hands bled. Wasn't nothing they wouldn't do. Great bunch of guys." He closed his mouth and shook his head from side to side. The nurse's aide came into the room and told us it was time for lunch. She asked if I'd mind pushing the old man to the dining room. Of course I didn't mind. I turned my new friend around and out the door toward the dining room. The old man was silent during the journey down the hallway. We entered the dining room and I pushed him to his assigned table where a nameplate designated his spot. An aide put a bib on him, a bib. He didn't object. Yet I can see him sitting cross-legged on the ground outside the mess hall, eating beans and rice out of his mess kit, wiping his mouth with his sleeve, talking animately with his buddies. Yeah, I had that zero. I don't know how he got away. I'll get him next time. But now he ate slowly, thin slices of roast beef, mashed potatoes, and green beans. All around him did the same. So many stories in this room. I wish I could hear them all before they fade away, but this day I was visiting the Corsair pilot. When lunch was over, I pushed John outside into the sun. He liked the sun and looked long at the sky. It used to be his sky. I pushed his wheelchair beside a bench. I sat on the bench. "Nice day for flying," I said. "Yep." "Ever land on a carrier?" "Oh yeah, lots of times." "That was exciting." "How do you mean?" "Well, you couldn't see over the nose of the Corsair, so you had to crab to see on final. Aim for your spot, then kick out of the crab at this last minute and say a little prayer." Now, let me give a quick explanation. Why he said kick was, the rudder on the rear of the airplane is controlled by pedals that you do with your feet. And that's what he's talking about. He's coming down like this, and then you kick it straight just before you hit the carrier. And I'll have to say, that is an accomplishment. I never did that. I was in the Air Force. So I always had a nice big long runway to land on. I didn't have to set it down on a carrier. John let out a little laugh and then continued. "If you got a wire, you got slammed forward. It was the best feeling in the world." The man could no longer walk, but years ago he pounded an F-4U Corsair onto the pitching carrier decks. "Did you fly after the war?" "No, not much. Wasn't nobody hiring pilots much, and I guess I was a little bit of a jerk. I really liked the Corsair. I didn't want to fly anything else. Kind of a jerk, wasn't I?" "No, sir, I wouldn't say that. I'd call it loyalty. Your airplane was loyal to you, and you were loyal to it." I think John liked hearing that. He smiled and nodded while looking off in the distance. He loved his Corsair. He'd always loved his Corsair. I asked if he ever saw any of his buddies after the war. "Yeah, we had a couple reunions," he said. "They were fun. You never forget the guys you were in combat with." Now, I can say that, too. They're friends for life. A lot of things are gone now. Or a lot of them are gone now. What a great bunch of guys. God, country, family, your buddies, and your airplane. How about that? Kind of simple. I guess I'm sounding like kind of a flag waver. Nothing wrong with that. Not a darn thing wrong with that. You've earned it. You can be proud of what you did. Thanks. I guess I am kind of proud of it. I love my country. What did you do after the war? Came home, worked, raised my family, got a good family. I'm prouder of them than I am of me. Any pilots? Yeah, got a grandson in the Air Force. I'm proud of him. I'm proud of all my kids. They're probably sick of my stories. Are you sick of my stories? No, I like you. I like them. Tell me some more. I should be dead. I never saw him. Don't know where he came from. Just all of a sudden, this zero was on my tail. I banked my airplane every which way, but he stuck with me. Then next thing I know, he's smoking and on fire. My buddy Bill got him. Bill's gone now, a couple years ago, I think. Nice to have friends, huh? Yeah, I didn't know it till I got home, but my airplane had some holes in it. She was a strong airplane, I tell you. Another aide poked her head out of the door and asked me to bring John for his medication. I pushed John back to his room, placing his wheelchair facing the World War II photos. Another wall was full of family photos. One man, two lives. John's proud of both lives. I'm proud of John. The medications made John drowsy. We talked a little more. I heard a couple more stories. They exuded duty and bravery, and of a good man. And in a larger context of thousands of good men. We bid farewell and vowed to meet again. John is gone now, but not his memory, his honor, or his service. John, his buddies, their Corsairs, and thousands more like them, in different airplanes and in different wartime occupations, are the cornerstone of our great country. Now that was the beginning. Now I'm going to talk about what happened to me. Actually, it was what happened to Mary and me. Mary and I went to Oshkosh for almost 20 years. I know that place like the back of my hand. I'm not talking about the city, I'm talking about the airfield. I know that place like the back of my hand. And this particular year that we were there, the Warbirds area, and the Warbirds are a division of the Experimental Aircraft Association, is always down at the north end of the field. Let me give you a little word diagram of what Whitman Field at Oshkosh looks like. There are two main runways. One of them is a north and south runway, and one of them is an east and west runway. The east and west runway is down at the north end of the field. I have never been down to the east and west runway. The north and south runway is down through the center of the field, goes about the middle of it is where the tower is. And that's where everything pretty much happens at Oshkosh, is on the north and south runway. And this particular time I was down at the Warbirds. I always go down there and I look at all of them. There was a Corsair setting in the corner of the area. They had like picket fences around the areas. This up here was a Corsair. And it was a little bit unusual in that it had a 3-bladed propeller on it. And the later Corsairs, there were 7 models of the Corsair. And the last one was built in 1953, the last year of the Korean War. Most of the Corsairs had 4-bladed propellers, but this particular one had a 3-bladed on it. And I knew that because of that, it was an early Corsair. Well, later on, I don't know if it was that same day or the next day, but later on, Mary and I were walking down the flight line there at Whitman Field, and I heard this whistle. The early Corsairs were famous for whistling when they flew. And I knew that because I had read a book about the Corsair. So all of a sudden, as we were walking down the flight line there, I don't remember which side of me Mary was on, but it doesn't matter. I heard this whistling. And I figured that it was probably that early model Corsair, because the later models didn't do it. The early ones whistled, but the later ones didn't. I figured it was that 3-bladed Corsair that I saw sitting up there in the field. And it was about 15 seconds, and all of a sudden Mary grabbed my arm. And she said, "That whistle, that awful whistle. I heard that very same whistle when I was a little girl in Indiana, and I'll never, ever forget it." Now, where do you suppose they trained the Corsair pilots when the Corsair was first coming in late 1942 or 1943? Where do you suppose they trained them? Maybe not the only place. Indiana. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that Mary really heard. And I'll tell you a little secret. I did too. I was 3 years old when that happened, when that stuff happened. And I heard that very same whistle myself. But I always thought, of course I knew it was an airplane, I always thought it was the propeller that was whistling. But I was wrong, it wasn't. It was the oil coolers in the wing tubes that whistled. So, if I had known that Mary had that connection with the Corsair, a couple of years earlier, we were looking, Mary had told me, she said, "You flew the B-52, we ought to have some pictures of the B-52. And we were at Oshkosh, and we were in one of the big exhibit buildings that they have there. They have 4 exhibit buildings there. And any of you ever watched the TV show Black Sheep Squadron? Any of you ever watched that? Okay, Robin has. Well, you know, it was about Gregory Boyington, who was in the Flying Tigers, and then he flew for this Corsair. He commanded a Corsair squadron during the war, and he flew the Corsair. And he was there. I saw him. And Mary walked up to them. I didn't go because I knew they wouldn't have any pictures of the B-52. But Mary went up and asked his wife if they had any pictures of the B-52. And she said no. But if I had known at that time about Mary's connection with the Corsair, I would have bought pictures from him. No question about it, I would have, but I didn't know it. You don't know those things. So, now I'm going to leave the Corsair. I'm going to talk about another airplane, B-51. You probably can't see that very well. And I should have brought this so Dave could have put a picture of it on the screen. But we were at Oshkosh. Like I said, we were there for 20 years. I don't remember what year this happened. But they have at Oshkosh an area they call Aeroshell Center. It's an area, I would venture to guess it's probably about 6 or 8 acres square that's all asphalted, completely asphalt. And they park airplanes there during Oshkosh. They got all kinds of airplanes parked there. As a matter of fact, I've gone through some airplanes there. And parked there were 2 airplanes that I noticed. 2 B-51s. One of them was a silver airplane, and it had a 3-bladed propeller on it. So that meant it was a B-51A with an Allison engine. The other one was quite a bit of blue on it. And it was a D model. It had a 4-bladed propeller. And these airplanes sat there together on the asphalt all week. And the one, the metal, the silver airplane, the name on it was Precious Metal. That's an unusual name for an airplane, but that was the name of it, Precious Metal. The other one, the name was Stang, S-T-A-N-G, which is the last part of the word Mustang. If you take the M-U off the front of it, that's what you have left, is Stang, and that's what was painted on that blue airplane. They sat there. So, they have a 2-hour air show every day at Oshkosh. And we had sat in different places to watch the air show. Well, during the years we've been there. But that particular year, I decided to walk up towards the south end of the north and south runway. And we were probably 500 feet from the end of that runway. And there's a road that goes up there, and then there's an open place, and then you got the runway. Of course, they always have like a picket fence along there so people aren't walking out onto the runway. So we were sitting in this area up there, and I venture to guess that was about 200 feet from the runway. It wasn't 100 yards. Probably about 60, 75 yards from the runway. And the reason I enjoyed being there, because when the planes were taking off, most of the time, apparently the wind is out of the north in there, and they took off to the north. They pulled out on the runway and they go in front of us, and then they get down a little ways, and then they come off the ground. So, in that particular day, we were sitting there, and I looked up, and there was precious metal sitting down there at the end of the runway. And he pulled out on the runway, gave it the gun, and was accelerating when he got right squarely in front of us. He chopped power, aborted his takeoff. Mary said that she thought she heard a bang, but for some reason, he aborted the takeoff right squarely in front of us. Of course, he just taxied on down the rest of the runway until there was a cross place so he could get off onto the taxiway. So we watched the rest of the air show that day. And the next day, we were there, and we were walking around the exhibit. So, have any of you ever been to the Farm Science Review? It's like Oshkosh, except instead of airplanes, it's farm machinery. But that's the way Oshkosh is. They've got exhibits everywhere. Of course, they're all trying to sell something. And so the next day, we came up there, and we were kind of in the center, where the center of that north and south runway is, to the west of it. And it was time to eat. So they have trams that run, because it's a lot of distance there. They're tractors, and they pull little wagons, and then you can sit on them. They've got seats along the sides of the wagons, you can sit on those. So we got on a tram, and we went up to the north end of the main exhibit area, where there was a food place there that we liked. And so we walked up, and I ordered our food, what we wanted, and we waited. And we waited. And we waited. And we waited. And I began to get irritated. I thought, why in the world are we waiting so long for this food? There weren't that many people around. They weren't that busy. But we waited, and we waited. And finally, they got our food ready, and we ate. So then, we started to go back down to the runway, and my intention was to go right back to the same place where we were the day before, because it was a good place. You could see well, and you were, you weren't long ways from the runway, but you were not right on top of the runway, of course. But so we went down there, and we got off the tram, and we were walking up along the runway. We were getting close to where I wanted to go, and all of a sudden, and there were airplanes parked, there were some vehicles parked, and all of a sudden we were blocked. You know this yellow tape that the police put out when they don't want you to go someplace? That was all around there. I thought, what's going on? Why can't we get there? And I looked, and I could see Stang on the runway with its nose down on the ground I couldn't see its nose, of course, there were vehicles in the way. But I could see the tail of it sticking up in the air. And I thought, what is this? What happened? Well, what happened was that Precious Metal and Stang collided on the runway. And I think Precious Metal landed on top of Stang. That's what happened. And I didn't know right at the time, but I found out later that Precious Metal, the silver P-51, when it came down and hit Stang, it rolled off to the side and exploded. The pilot did not survive. Now the other man, the one that was in Stang, he was able to get out and climb down off of it. So he survived. But if we hadn't had to wait so long for our dinner, Mary and I almost certainly would have been right there. We would have seen it at close range. And I am convinced that the Lord made it so we wouldn't be there. Mary had enough death in her family. She didn't need to see any more. And is there anybody here that would like to be 200 feet away from an airplane when it explodes? I don't think so. Of course, I never heard of anybody being hurt there, any spectators being hurt there. But anyway, that is what happened. It isn't that pretty a story, but it's what really happened. I'm convinced that the Lord decided that my work wasn't done yet. He didn't want me to be there. And he made sure that we weren't there when it happened. There have been other accidents at Oshkosh. Of course, if you fly them, you're going to have accidents. I mean, it seems to happen. But you try to do the best you can. If anybody wants to see this picture, I'll be glad to show it to you. I am so glad and so honored that the Lord used my love of airplanes to bring me to His truth. Now that really happened. It really happened. I didn't really write out a closing, but I'll just say this. There are thousands of people that flew airplanes in the past and now. And it is one of the great honors of my life that I can say that I'm one of them. And that